What's going on, guys? I'm CFB Kings, and welcome back to another episode of the CFBKings Show. Really appreciate you tuning in today. Week 5 has concluded, and I'm pretty sure we can say that it was the best week we've seen so far this season. Back-to-back weeks, we've just had incredible games. Week 4 was ridiculous, and I think Week 5 topped it, and we'll be breaking everything down from Week 5 today. Before we get to Georgia and Alabama, I quickly wanted to say thanks for all the growth lately across Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and here on YouTube as well. I really appreciate the support and love being able to see new people interacting with all this stuff. So make sure to tell your friends, follow at CFB Kings on Twitter and Instagram. If they're into podcasts or just hearing more about college football, tell them to subscribe here or follow on Spotify, all under the name CFB Kings. All right, number 2 Georgia went to number 4 Alabama last week, and some are calling it the greatest game they've ever seen. Certainly the best game of the season so far, and there's probably a case to be made for it being among some of the best in recent history. It was just a ridiculous game, and it had everything that you could want in a primetime top 5 showdown. Alabama survived 41-34 after it looked like it was going to be a blowout during the first half. The Crimson Tide got out to a 28-0 lead, 28-0 over Georgia. Something that we really haven't seen that type of offensive performance against Georgia in about 4 years. I think Florida put 38 on them in the first half back in 2020. That was the last time they lost a regular season game, and Saturday snapped their 42 or 43 game regular season winning streak, which is just ridiculous. But yeah, Alabama scored 21 in the first quarter. They had a safety in the first half. It was 30-7 at halftime. Jalen Milroe and the Tide just looked absolutely unstoppable for the first 30 minutes. The crowd was losing it, and it was just all Alabama. Then the fourth quarter came along. It was 33-15, an 18-point game going into the fourth. Slowly but surely, though, Georgia clawed their way back. They scored touchdowns with 10 minutes left, 5 minutes left, and 2.5 minutes left. But then Ryan Williams, the 17-year-old true freshman wide receiver for the Tide, had a 75-yard touchdown. He made 2 Georgia defenders collide. He pulled off some of the most ridiculous mid-play moves that I've ever seen. He ran past the rest of the secondary, and before he even got to the end zone, he was already reaching up towards his face mask, taking out his mouthpiece, and getting ready to celebrate at like the 5-yard line. This kid is 17 years old, and he's playing like he's a senior, like a 5th-year senior. But yeah, you've probably heard it a time or 10 about him being 17, but that's just ridiculous. He reclassified during his recruitment and moved a year up. And it's not like he's just a younger recruit. He literally should be a senior in high school right now. And he's out there making one of the best secondaries in the country look silly with the game on the line in a top 5 matchup. He finished with 6 receptions for 177 yards and a touchdown. Jalen Milroe had a career night as well. He was 27 of 33 for 374 yards, 2 touchdowns, an interception, and then had 16 carries for 117 yards and 2 touchdowns as well. Milroe became the first player ever with over 300 yards passing, over 100 yards rushing, and 2 rushing touchdowns against a top 5 opponent. He's also the first SEC player ever with over 350 passing yards, over 100 rushing yards, and a completion percentage of 80%. In last week's episode, I said that Alabama would need to win the running game if they were going to win on the scoreboard. And more specifically, I said that Alabama would need around 75 plus more rushing yards than Georgia to win the game. Well, Alabama won the game by 7, and they outrushed Georgia by 90 yards. They averaged 5.4 yards per carry, while Georgia averaged just 3.1. The Tide also controlled time of possession, possessing the ball for 5 more minutes than the Dawgs. On the other side of things, Georgia looked dreadful in the first half. They gave up touchdowns on 3 consecutive drives to open up the game, and that was something we really hadn't seen since that 2020 game against Florida, like I mentioned earlier, where they gave up 38 in the first half. And of course, they bounced back in the second half. Carson Beck threw for over 300 yards in the second half alone to get them back in it. But he also had 3 interceptions, 2 in the first half, which contributed to them being in that hole in the first place, and then the third, of course, in the end zone to seal the game for Alabama. According to the ESPN win probability meter, this game went from Alabama having a 99.7% chance to win with 10 minutes left in the game to Georgia having a 66.8% chance with 2.5 minutes left. And then 16 seconds later, back to Alabama having a 95% chance to win after the Ryan Williams touchdown. One of the biggest swings in the fourth quarter, especially in a game of this type of magnitude. that I've ever seen. I also wanted to touch on the implications of this game moving forward, because this was really the first major game of the 12-team college football playoff era, where for Georgia, losing it sucks, obviously, but it hasn't exactly changed their chances of being in national title contention like it would have last season. In the 4-team college football playoff era, that loss makes it so, first off, they can't lose another game at all. They still go to Texas, they still go to Ole Miss, they still host Tennessee, and they'd really just have to win out. No 2-loss team ever made the college football playoff, and even then, one loss might not be enough to get in, or that one loss might keep them out. One-loss Big Ten champion Ohio State was left out in 2018. Georgia themselves were left out at 12-1 last year after losing to Alabama. And now, not only does that loss to Alabama not jeopardize really that much about their chances at all, a loss to Texas or anyone else wouldn't either. It might take them out of SEC title contention in that auto bid spot, but even then they'd still be alive for everything else that they set out to accomplish this year, including a national championship. So for Georgia fans, the loss to Alabama is obviously a tough blow, a tough one to stomach, especially in the fashion that it occurred, snapping the 42-game regular season win streak and all that. 1-9 in the last 10 to Alabama. Saban's gone and they still can't beat them, but everything else is still there for this season. A very fortunate year with the timing of the expansion to not have an undefeated regular season for the first time since COVID. I just wanted to touch on that because this is really the first game where the implications aren't what they used to be, and for a loss in a major game like this. I mean, the implications of a loss for the last 100 years of college football have been absolutely devastating and often detrimental to a season. And now it's like, well, yeah, Georgia lost, but how much does that really matter? I mean, they can still get an auto bid to the college football playoff if they win the SEC championship. They can still host a college football playoff game even if they don't win the SEC title. They could lose again to Texas and still not even be in jeopardy of probably being outside the top 11 with the way that the committee's handled teams like that in the past. So not ideal in my mind, this new system, but we'll see how the rest of the year plays out under this new playoff format. Let me know what you think about the expanded playoff and what you think of the change in implications for losses like Georgia's on Saturday, because I feel like there's a lot of people who like the 12-team college football playoff, a lot of people who don't, a lot of people who are fans of programs like Penn State and Ole Miss and those teams that never got into the 4-team playoff, but find the 12-team one more appealing because it gives them a shot that they didn't really have before, or that they had the shot but that they just couldn't take advantage of before. So obviously if you're a team of a program like that, or a group of 5 team who can now have a chance at the national title, I can understand all that stuff and why that would be more appealing. But for losses like this, though, for Georgia, that used to be very, very, very critical. And now it's like, okay, I mean, yeah, they lost to Bama, but they could also still lose again and still not really even be out of the national title conversation. So there's definitely some pros and cons of the new system, but let me know what you think. For Alabama, the Tide has returned to AP number 1. They have now been ranked number 1 at some point in 16 of the last 17 seasons, which is absurd. Kalen DeBoer has them back at the top in his first year there. He's beaten Georgia. He has a top 2 win, and things really haven't changed at Alabama since the departure of Nick Saban. And after a little bit of uncertainty coming into the year, what everything would look like, the Tide now looks like a major contender for the national title again, which picks up right where Saban had left them basically every year. Let's move on to the 2 major upsets. 2 unranked teams went on the road to top 10 opponents in their stadiums and beat them on Saturday. Kentucky went on the road to number 6 Ole Miss and shocked the Rebels 20-17. And this is one of the more surprising results of the season so far. And it was kind of strange because Ole Miss was a 17-point favorite, but Kentucky really played well against Georgia, holding them to just 13 points. And that felt like the game that might be the outlier, though, for Kentucky's season after they lost by 25 to South Carolina. They've really played well against Georgia at home for the last 5 years, and it just felt like a continuation of that pattern, basically. But now, after this week, the fluke and the outlier is looking like it might be that game against South Carolina, where they gave up 31. On Saturday against the Rebels, Kentucky held them to 353 total yards, 14 first downs, and 17 points. They gave up a really quick touchdown on the first drive of the game. Ole Miss scored 2 minutes in. So outside of that, outside of the very first drive of the game, Kentucky held Ole Miss to 270 total yards, 11 first downs, and 10 points, which is absolutely ridiculous because Ole Miss had the number one offense in the country coming into that game, averaging 55 points per game. Just a crazy performance from that Kentucky defense that really resembled a lot of what they were able to do against Georgia as well. And much of what Ole Miss had done with the 55 points per game had to do with their opponents, but coming into Week 5, they had the number one defense in the country too, allowing just 5.5 points per game. Scoring 55 and allowing just 5.5. They were averaging a 50-point win coming into this week. Kentucky scored 20. They put up 22 first downs compared to just the 14 for Ole Miss, and 336 total yards. It wasn't flashy, never really is with Kentucky, but it wasn't anything crazy, but they actually played well. They totally dominated time of possession. They had the ball for nearly 40 minutes of the game. They doubled the time of possession that Ole Miss had. They moved the ball, and they did what they needed to do and got it done. One massive thing that I wanted to point out in this game was the flip in decision-making from Mark Stoops and the Kentucky offensive staff. A couple weeks ago, I, along with basically everyone else, was very, very critical of Kentucky's choice to punt at midfield against Georgia when there was 3 minutes left in the game, which basically felt like they quit. They put everything back into Georgia's hands and relied on getting a stop rather than just trying to get that first down to continue the drive and maybe go kick a field goal. But with as bad as that was, they had an even more dire situation against Ole Miss last week, and they didn't punt. They went for it and got it. And on Saturday, there was a little under 4 minutes left. It was 4th and 7 at their own 20. Their own 20-yard line, not midfield like against Georgia. 4th and 7 from their own 20. Down by 4, Brock Vandegrift threw a gorgeous pass to Berrien Brown down the sideline. They needed 8 yards to stay alive, and they got 63. After that play, they went down, scored a touchdown, and won the game. That touchdown ended up being the game winner. So they learned from that Georgia game, gave themselves a chance, let their offense decide it, and executed it perfectly. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of what-ifs going around in people's heads in Lexington because they may have been one pass away from converting that 4th down against Georgia, kicking a field goal, and having 2 top 10 wins in the first month of the season. So, very intriguing start to the year in Lexington, and the Wildcats will be a fun team to watch the rest of the way. As for Ole Miss, it feels like there's a game every year where it's just kind of like, what was that? And this one felt awfully similar to the Arkansas game last season, and in a lot of ways it statistically was. The Arkansas game was in Week 6 last year. The Razorbacks went into Oxford at 2-3. The Kentucky game was in Week 5 this year. The Wildcats went into Oxford at 2-2. They led the Razorbacks 17-13 going into the fourth quarter last season. They led the Wildcats 17-13 going into the fourth quarter on Saturday. They put up 349 total yards on Arkansas. They put up 353 total yards on Kentucky. Last year against the Razorbacks, Jackson Dart was 16 of 25 passing for 1 touchdown. On Saturday, he was 18 of 27 passing for 1 touchdown. And now they were able to escape with a win over Arkansas last year because, frankly, the Hogs don't ever let themselves win major games, but they couldn't do the same against Kentucky on Saturday. This is just a brutal loss for the Rebels because this felt like a season where they're preseason top 6. They have a Heisman contender at quarterback. The playoff expanded. Making the expanded playoff seemed like a minimum of what they had their mind on accomplishing, and now all of that's in major jeopardy. The rest of their schedule isn't the hardest of any team. It's not necessarily a gauntlet, but they do still have Georgia coming to Oxford and a road trip to LSU. They have Oklahoma, who doesn't quite look like what we were expecting. Arkansas will find a way to lose that game. They have a road trip to South Carolina this week that could potentially be interesting. They go to Florida in November. Maybe a game that, if the Gators have things turned around, that could be somewhat close. But then Mississippi State, a rivalry game. That was a 17-7 final score last year. So who knows with how the Bulldogs have played so far. But if they do lose to Georgia, last year they were 10-2. Their only losses were on the road to Georgia and on the road to Alabama, the 2 teams in the SEC championship and 2 of the committee's final top 6. The committee had Ole Miss at number 11 with those 2 losses to the 2 teams in the SEC title, and they would have been the last at-large team in the expanded playoff, with Liberty taking that number 12 spot had it existed last season. So if they were to go 10-2 this year with their only losses to unranked Kentucky and Georgia, both at home, instead of like last season where their losses were to Georgia and Alabama, both on the road, then those losses paired with a ridiculously bad non-conference schedule, I don't think they'd be a top 11 team on Selection Sunday. And that's purely going off of what the committee was able to do last year and where they had them. I mean, number 11 with their only 2 losses on the road to teams that were in the SEC championship game, and they were the last team in, I don't think they'd be in if they follow that same criteria. If their losses are both at home and one of them to unranked Kentucky, we'll have to see how the Wildcats do the rest of the way, but right now that loss is not very good. So that'll be very interesting to watch because the Rebels are really in a win-out situation now, and it's just wild how quickly they went from the number 1 offense and number 1 defense in the country coming into last week to losing to an unranked opponent at home and now needing to win out to have a shot at the expanded playoff. Just crazy. The other unranked over top 10 upset this week was Arizona on the road over number 10 Utah. The Utes were coming off that big win over Oklahoma State in Stillwater last week. They finally got into the AP top 10. They finally had some national attention. People were talking about them for the college football playoff, for the Big 12 title, and then they immediately lose at home to unranked Arizona. That was an Arizona team who was coming off a bye week, but the week before that, they were destroyed by Kansas State, 31-7. And Arizona really hadn't looked good in any week so far this year. They gave up 39 points to New Mexico in week 1, who's currently 117th in the ESPN FPI. They struggled with FCS Northern Arizona. They went into the fourth quarter of that game up just 13-10 on their FCS opponent. And then they were dominated by Kansas State by 24. So a really impressive performance on Saturday night to go into Rice-Eccles, to put everything that had happened in the first 3 weeks behind them, put 366 yards of offense on that defense, and beat the Utes by 2 touchdowns. The Big 12 is a crazy place right now, and that's really kind of what I think a lot of people expected during the conference realignment stuff was the group of teams that were brought in from the Pac-12 and the ones already in the Big 12 that were staying. They were just all very even, and there wasn't a team that was head and shoulders clearly the favorite above everybody else, and it's playing out exactly that way so far. The only undefeated teams left in the Big 12 are 5-0 BYU and 4-0 Iowa State. Just who we all thought. The teams who are unbeaten in Big 12 play are BYU, Colorado, Texas Tech, Iowa State, Arizona, and West Virginia. Just think about that alone. The top 4 teams favored to win the Big 12 coming into the year were Utah, Kansas State, Oklahoma State, and Kansas. BYU was picked 13th and is currently number 1. It's still very early, of course, but this conference is just crazy right now. Very fun to watch, and Big 12 play is only getting started, so it'll be really fun to see how it all unfolds. Another major game in Week 5 was number 16 Notre Dame's 31-24 victory over number 15 Louisville. This was a really great matchup, and even though it was on Peacock, completely ridiculous that you need a streaming service to watch a top 16 matchup, but it was very, very entertaining. I wanted to start off by saying I think Notre Dame's a very solid team. I picked them to go to the college football playoff, and they did enough on Saturday to win an extremely important game for their chances of that happening to stay alive. However, this is a game that Louisville really should have had. The Cardinals had a bad snap on a punt that went over their punter's head. Notre Dame recovered at the 3, then immediately scored. Tyler Shuck, Louisville quarterback, threw a pass right on the money for a first down. The wide receiver bobbles it directly into the hands of a Notre Dame DB. If you didn't see the game, the Cardinals wide receiver, he literally bobbled the ball, and it almost looked like he handed it to Xavier Watts, the Notre Dame defensive back. But Louisville running back Don Chaney had a run where he really appeared to get a first down on 4th and 1 at the Notre Dame 15. This is with like 30 seconds left in the first half. Louisville was well within field goal range. Could have potentially scored a touchdown if he had gotten that first down, but called short, turnover on downs. They also had another questionable spot on their final drive when they were down by 7, where it looked like the running back had gotten the first down, but was again marked short. Louisville outgained Notre Dame by 115 yards, 395 to 280. The Cardinals had 8 more first downs than Notre Dame, and a really tough one to stomach there with some of the self-inflicted mistakes and questionable calls. And again, Notre Dame made a lot of plays and took advantage of those Louisville mistakes, but yeah, the Irish get the win 31-24, and they keep their at-large college football playoff hopes seemingly alive for now, and next week they get to rest, heal up a bit during their bye week. For Louisville, Tyler Shuck was great. He was 24-41 for 263 yards, 3 touchdowns, and the interception, which was entirely on the wide receiver, and without that, he would have been at least 25 of 41 for like 280 yards, but and who knows what could have happened on the rest of that drive to potentially get another touchdown or whatever. But Shuck also had 36 yards rushing, so with his 264 passing, he had 300 total yards exactly and 3 touchdowns on the road at a top 15 team. Ja'Cory Brooks had 5 receptions for 71 yards and 2 touchdowns. Colin Lacey was big to have back as well. He had 5 receptions for 71 yards also. And like I said, just a tough loss for Louisville because it felt like they probably could have had it a few times, but just couldn't get it done up there in South Bend. They're still undefeated in ACC play, though, and I think the Cardinals will be a contender for the conference and the expanded college football playoff field the rest of the way. On Friday night, we had a wild one down in Miami between the Canes and the Hokies. We'll get to the Hail Mary in a minute, but the game itself was phenomenal. Bashal Tootin, the running back for Virginia Tech, had 19 carries for 141 yards and a touchdown. Cam Ward had 400 in total yards and 5 touchdowns. Miami tight end Elijah Arroyo had 2 receptions, 1 for 43 yards and 1 for 45 yards and a touchdown. Xavier Restrepo was crazy. He made a catch laying on his back on a crucial 4th down late in the game, and he made some other big plays for them as well. This game was awesome because there were points in it where it looked like Miami was going to pull away and win by 2 touchdowns, and then Virginia Tech started to come back, and then points in it where it looked like Virginia Tech was going to pull away and win by like 14 points, and then Miami started to come back. It was a back-and-forth game that really had it all. And there were points early for Miami. They had an ESPN win probability of 95% early in the second quarter. They were up 7 and driving, and then the Hokies pick off Cam Ward down near the end zone. Then later in the game, Virginia Tech led by 10 in the fourth quarter. They had an 86.2% chance to win, but the Canes fought back. Cam Ward made a ridiculous play where he pitched the ball out while almost getting sacked. The tight end catches it and runs like 30 yards and sets up what eventually was the game-winning touchdown. Now, the Hail Mary call at the end was insane. I was pretty vocal about it on Twitter and Instagram as everything was going on Friday night. My opinion on this is that they got it right. I don't think the Virginia Tech player ever had full control of it. I don't think there's anything in the replay that ever shows that. When they hit the ground, which you have to survive in order for it to be a catch, of course, like they always say, it's moving all over the place. The Miami and Virginia Tech players are actually kind of holding hands. It looks like the Miami DB has the finger, one of the fingers of the Tech receiver. The ball is sitting in between their hips and like sides while they're laying on the sideline out of bounds. And that was actually what the ACC came out on Saturday and said, is that the ruling in the replay review was that the Miami player was out of bounds. The ball was loose and he was touching it, which thus makes the play dead and the pass incomplete. I don't know how it was ever ruled a catch on the field, to be honest. Neither of the officials that were down there in the end zone, one was kind of behind them and the other one was on the other sideline. So I don't know who made the touchdown call, and you can see in the broadcast they're kind of talking to each other, and one of the officials is like shaking his head like he doesn't know or didn't see or thought it was incomplete or something, and it was just a wild play as it happened on the field. But I don't blame Virginia Tech fans for being mad, of course. It being called a touchdown on the field and then overturned was pretty brutal, but in my opinion, it just never should have been called a touchdown on the field. Despite the loss, I thought this game was actually good in a lot of ways for Virginia Tech, and I know obviously they don't want moral victories. They wanted the victory on the field, and I understand that, but putting up 34 points on a top 10 team on the road, a team who came into week 5 with a top 10 defense, giving up only, I think, 10 points per game, and taking the game to the very last play is what we thought the Hokies could be this season. Losing to Vanderbilt and Rutgers is not, and starting 2-3 in their first 5 games is obviously a bit of a letdown, but at least on Friday night, they looked more like the team that could turn things around and win a bunch of games down the stretch. Number 9 Penn State beat number 19 Illinois 21-7. This was probably my best feel on a game all week, which is very unfortunate because I didn't take the under, which I was strongly considering doing. But in last week's preview, I said that I thought 18.5 was too much for Penn State. I thought the Illini would keep it a close game into the second half. It was 7-7 at halftime and 14-7 until a late interception. And then the Nittany Lions pulled away with a touchdown with under 2 minutes left to win by 14. So a ranked win for Penn State. Illinois is heading into their bye week now, so they get some time to regroup a little bit and set themselves up for the rest of the year. And the Nittany Lions have UCLA this week in a conference game. And UCLA is really having a rough season. Penn State is a 28.5 point favorite, and we'll see if they can cover that one. Number 25 Boise State beat Washington State 45-24. And Ashton Jeanty is currently the number one player in the country in my Heisman Watch rankings after what he did to the Cougars and really because of what he's done all season. Against Washington State on Saturday night, Jeanty had 26 carries for 259 yards and 4 touchdowns. Yeah, that's 10 yards per carry. 26 carries for 259 yards and 4 touchdowns on a team who came into the week as the first team in the receiving votes section of the AP poll. So he put up those numbers against basically the number 26 team in the country. He's just unbelievable, and if he's able to sustain even a fraction of this production, he'll be a Heisman finalist in December, if not holding the trophy and giving the speech. Boise State is now ranked number 20, and they are in the lead for that group of 5 college football playoff spot. Number 23 Kansas State dominated number 20 Oklahoma State 42-20, and all things considered, it was pretty much the same story for the Cowboys. Ollie Gordon actually did have a productive first quarter. He had 72 yards very early on in the game, but then after that he got banged up a little bit and had minimal carries down the stretch. I think he had 72 yards in the first quarter and finished with 76. Alan Bowman's completion percentage was right around 50% again. It's the third game this year where his completion percentage has been in the 50s or below. The Cowboys missed a field goal. They fumbled at the Kansas State 22-yard line. They threw an interception at the Kansas State 30 and threw an interception in the end zone. So there were definitely a few opportunities there to make this a competitive game, but they just couldn't do it. Kansas State improved to 4-1. They moved up a couple spots in this week's AP poll. Avery Johnson was great. He was 19 of 31 for 259 yards and 3 touchdowns. Then also had 5 carries for 60 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. So 319 total yards and 5 total touchdowns on a ranked opponent. DJ Giddens was phenomenal as well. He had 15 carries for 187 yards and a touchdown, averaging 12.5 yards per carry. And like I said a minute ago with BYU and just the Big 12 in general, this conference is wide open. And even though Kansas State has a near 30-point loss in conference play already, there's still a ton of time to go in the season, of course. It's only week 6. And I think most teams have played like 4, maybe 5 games if they haven't had an early bye week. But yeah, a ton of time to go. Big 12 play is just getting started. And it'll be interesting to see where Kansas State finishes. Duke came back from a 20-point deficit to beat North Carolina on Saturday, and this game was ridiculous. The Tar Heels led 20-0 with 6 minutes left in the third quarter, but from that point on, it was all Blue Devils. Duke's running back Star Thomas had 30 carries for 166 yards and a touchdown. I'll touch on that more at the end of the episode, but Jordan Moore had 4 receptions for 80 yards, and the Blue Devils are 5-0 for the first time since 1994. And I said it in the previous episode, but Duke has been 4-0 in 5 different seasons in the college football playoff era since 2014. So in the last 11 seasons, they've started 4-0 5 different times, but hadn't been able to get that 5th win until now. 5-0 for the first time since 1994, and it's time that the Blue Devils start to receive some AP poll votes. A couple quick recaps here. Oklahoma absolutely stole one in Jordan Hare from Auburn on Saturday. If you didn't watch this game, definitely go check out the highlights because it is crazy. The Tigers had the ball and were driving up 21-16 with 4 minutes left before Kip Lewis picked off Peyton Thorne and returned it 63 yards for a touchdown to take the lead and scored what ended up being a game-winning touchdown. This game felt a lot like Louisville-Notre Dame, just in terms of how many chances it felt like Louisville had to win that game, but they just never could take advantage of it. Auburn had just as many chances to beat Oklahoma, if not more, but just couldn't get the job done. Auburn missed a field goal twice, actually, right before the half from 27 yards. They missed it, and then Oklahoma was called for 12 men on the field. So the kicker goes back out there from an even closer range and misses again from 27 yards. They came up short on a 4th and goal from the 1-yard line. They outgained Oklahoma by almost 200 yards. It was 482 to 291 in total yardage. They had 15 more first downs than Oklahoma. 15, 26 to 11. They possessed the ball for 11 more minutes, 35.5 to 24.5. They had fewer penalties. They had fewer penalty yards. They were better in 3rd down conversion percentage. They were better in 4th down conversion percentage. But the most meaningful stat of all is that they were -1 in the turnover margin, which was that pick 6 that led to them losing 27-21. Michael Hawkins Jr., the quarterback for Oklahoma, he made his first career start on Saturday in Jordan-Hare and got the job done on the road in that crazy environment. So props to him, props to the Sooners for finding a way to win this game. And this season has just been a rough one so far for the Auburn Tigers. UNLV beat Fresno State 59-14 on Saturday, 59-14. And if you remember back to last week with the whole Matthew Sluka situation, the quarterback for the Rebels who basically quit after not getting more NIL money, well, UNLV replaced him, and they might be even better. Haj Malik Williams, an FCS transfer from Campbell, the Campbell Camels, was phenomenal. And I'll talk about his stats at the end of the episode. He's a king of the week. But he was just ridiculous. This is his first career start for UNLV, and he put up ridiculous numbers. So stick around to the Kings of the Week segment, and I'll talk about him more there. Wide receiver Ricky White had 10 receptions for 127 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then on defense, they had 4 interceptions. They picked off Mikey Keene twice, then Joshua Wood, who threw 3 passes. One of them was an interception. Then they put in Jaden Mandel, who went 0 for 1 with an interception. 4 interceptions off of 3 different quarterbacks. And for UNLV, all 4 interceptions were made by a different player. Jonathan Baldwin had one. Jeremiah Vessel had one. Jalen Catalon had one. He also led the team in tackles. And Cameron Oliver had one as well. UNLV is 4-0 for the first time in program history. They got ranked in the AP Top 25 for the first time in program history, and despite all of their drama last week, they happen to be having one of their best seasons ever and are in contention for not only the Mountain West title, but that Group of 5 college football playoff spot. I also wanted to quickly touch on SMU's beatdown of Florida State. The Mustangs won 42-16 on Saturday and just took it to the Noles. The Mustangs are 4-1 now, with their lone loss coming to number 17 BYU by 3 points, a game that they really could have won. And BYU's 5-0. They're the number 1 team in the Big 12 right now. They destroyed Kansas State by 29 2 weeks ago. And if SMU didn't make a terrible decision, and they had a player try to pitch the ball while being tackled at the 5-yard line, and that led to a fumble late in the game. If they hadn't done that, they really could have beaten the Cougars. SMU had been splitting time at quarterback during their first couple games between Preston Stone and Kevin Jennings, but since they named Jennings QB1, they've beaten TCU by 24 and Florida State by 26. They beat TCU 66-42 and FSU 42-16. And this is the SMU that I think a lot of people expected coming into the season. This looks more like the SMU that won 11 games and the AAC title last year, and they're starting to take form now. Jennings is 30 of 42, which is 71.4%, and has accounted for 444 total yards and 5 touchdowns over the last 2 weeks. All right, before Kings of the Week, I wanted to recap my picks from last week, and I might do this each week going forward, hoping that they're good enough to recap. But in Week 5, we went 4-4, broke even. And despite not making anything, I was pretty happy with the reads that I had on things. Most of them were right there, and to be honest, we had a couple bad beats. Virginia Tech at Miami over 54. I put that one out on Twitter. There were 72, I believe, scored there. Felt confident in that one pretty much the whole time. NC State minus 5.5 over Northern Illinois. They won by 7, basically right on the money. Wake Forest was an absolute killer. I had 2 different ones on them. I had Wake minus 3, and then the first quarter under 13.5. They lost by 3 instead of winning by 3, and there was 17 in the first quarter instead of under 13.5. And it was looking good for a while, though. Wake kicked a field goal to bring the total to 10 in the first quarter with, I think, 2.5 minutes left. I was like, all right, we just need this drive to go longer than 2 minutes and 31 seconds, or we could even have them drive down and kick a field goal and still be all right. Then first play of the Louisiana drive, 60-yard run down to the Wake 15. I was just beside myself. And then they even ran a couple plays too down there just to make me think it still had a chance. Then they punched it in with 56 seconds left in the quarter to take it from 10 to 17. Just brutal. Then later in the game, Wake scores a touchdown to tie it at 38 with 1:55 left, I think. And I'm thinking, okay, defensive stop, overtime, touchdown, win it 45-38 to cover. Yeah, no defensive stop was made. Louisiana took 1 minute to get down and get into field goal range, and they took a 41-38 lead. Then, worst of all, Wake gets the ball back with like 50 seconds. They put together a solid, quick drive. They get into field goal range from 42 yards away. And I'm like, okay, we can set it into overtime at 41 instead of at 38. Maybe get a touchdown there, win 48-41, something like that, have it cover. They kick the field goal and doink it off the left post. It drops to the ground. Demon Deacons fail to win, fail to cover. That one was just brutal. It was all there, though. I was pleased with the read, but just couldn't get it done. Then Stanford at Clemson, first quarter over 13. This one was terrible. In the last 2 weeks, Clemson had scored 35 and 28 in the first quarter. And in addition to them, Stanford had a first quarter touchdown on TCU and a first quarter touchdown on Syracuse, the other two FBS teams they'd played. I thought this was one of the best plays of the week, and it really was until it wasn't. Stanford gets the ball first. Clemson immediately gets a strip and a fumble recovery. Klubnik took it into the end zone for a 34-yard touchdown 3 plays later. 7 points, not even 3 minutes into the game. I think it was like 12-20 or something like that left. Stanford gets the ball. They drive all the way down the field. They throw an interception in the end zone. I was like, okay, maybe Clemson can go get another one. Clemson gets the ball. First play, they throw 70 yards downfield. Wesco, their freshman receiver, catches it and takes it to the Stanford 10. They get stopped down there, though, ended up having to settle for a field goal. So that was 10 points. Stanford gets the ball. They go all the way down the field again, and again throw an interception, this time at the Clemson 9. So I was like, oh my gosh. We had the immediate touchdown. Then Stanford just collapsed in the red zone twice. Clemson had to settle for a field goal. I think it ended up being 10-0, I think, at the end of the first. So very, very close on that one. But yeah, just couldn't get it. Then Texas State at Sam Houston, over 55.5. Absolutely nailed that one. There was 53 scored in the first half, finished with 79. Sam Houston won 40-39. Then Western Kentucky and Boston College over 48.5. I think I said this one at 54.5 in the preview episode, but yeah, that was before they decided to announce that Boston College quarterback Thomas Castellanos wasn't playing. So that was fun. I ended up taking the dipped total anyway at 48.5 since I put it in the episode, but yeah, it finaled at 41, 21-20 Boston College. So some extenuating circumstances there, but still not the worst pick. UConn minus 5.5. I've tried to say it for a few weeks now, but the Huskies are legit. They were a 5.5 point favorite over Buffalo and won 47-3. They were a 2.5 point favorite over FAU 2 weeks ago and won by 34. I've been on both. I said it in the preview episode that they're very undervalued right now, and I'm already peeking at some of their lines for next week. So 4-4 in week 5, 22-10 overall on the year, and I'm looking forward to week 6. All right, time for Kings of the Week, a segment where I highlight some of the most impressive performances across the country each and every week. First up, we've got Duke running back Star Thomas. He was an absolute workhorse in the Blue Devils' 21-20 comeback win over rival North Carolina. And I mentioned it earlier, but he had 30 carries for 166 yards and a touchdown. He also had 2 receptions for 45 yards and a receiving touchdown as well. So 211 total yards, 2 touchdowns, and a 20-point comeback win over a rival to improve to 5-0 for the first time since 1994. Next up, we have UNLV's Haj Malik Williams in his first career start after being thrust into the starting role after all that controversy last week. Williams went 13 of 16 passing, which is 81.3%, for 182 yards and 3 touchdowns, which is pretty good on its own, right? Well, then he had 12 carries for 119 yards and a touchdown rushing, too. 301 total yards and 4 touchdowns to lead UNLV to a 4-0 start for the first time in program history in his first career game as starter for the Rebels. And lastly, the entire University of Alabama. Jalen Milroe had 391 total yards and 4 total touchdowns. Ryan Williams had 6 receptions for 177 yards and a touchdown. He made 2 of the most ridiculous catches, given the circumstances, that I've ever seen. Alabama's defense, they nearly choked it in the second half, but they also picked off Carson Beck 3 times, 3 different players with a pick, and they also had a forced safety. Kalen DeBoer got the Tide back to number 1 in his first season as head coach. And then hats off to everyone who coordinated having President Trump in attendance as well. That could not have been easy to secure the stadium, the campus, the city, all that stuff. And all around an incredible week from the entire University of Alabama. That's going to wrap up this episode of the show. Really appreciate you tuning in and making it all the way to the end. Week 5 was a blast, and I just wanted to say thanks again for all the support lately. We gained 300 followers yesterday alone on Instagram, so truly thank you, and I'm excited to see what the rest of the season has in store for the pages and everything on the field. So make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel if you're watching on YouTube, and follow if you're on Spotify, and make sure to follow at CFB Kings on Twitter and Instagram for all things college football. Thank you so much for watching. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and take care.